Our first guest is the one and the only Stephen Donziger. We've been covering Stephen's case, as you all know. He's been on many times before. We've been covering his legal situation since the springtime. And Stephen is, of course, known for his legal battles with Chevron, particularly the Lago Agrio oil field case. He represented over 30,000 farmers and indigenous people from Ecuador in that case against Chevron related to environmental damages and health effects due to oil drilling. And Ecuador awarded the plaintiffs $9.5 billion in legal damages. And then, of course, they went after him. He is now out of the Danbury prison that he was in Connecticut, and he is home. But you are still welcome, by the way, Stephen. Thank you for joining us. A Happy New Year. You look healthy, so that I think is let's just start off with, people don't always look their finest or feel their finest. How are you feeling after being at Danbury and now home?
Thank you for having me, Nomiki. It's always great to share my perspective with you. I mean, I feel pretty good. I'm not happy that I'm still in this incredibly long detention. I'm not free. I am home, but I have an ankle bracelet and I can't go anywhere. I'm in detention here under the custody of the Bureau of Prisons. But obviously I'm thrilled to be out of Danbury and back with my family. I question, however, I have roughly 4 months left on my sentence, of a 6-month sentence. And again, I assert my innocence. My case is under appeal. It's a contempt case. But, you might remember prior to going to prison, I was under home detention for 26 months. That's over 2 years. And that didn't count toward my sentence. So I'm questioning now why the 26 months or for the 26 months wouldn't apply to the 4 months I have left, and I should just be released right now. So we're going to try to do something about that. But, I'm happy to be home and I'm feeling relatively well. And I'm just looking forward to the future.
Just some logistical questions here. How is this? Is it different at all from your house arrest? You have an ankle bracelet, but other than that, I mean, is there anything else that occurs in your home?
Well, it's different. I mean, in this sense, the Bureau, first of all, when I was under house arrest prior to going to prison, I was under the supervision of an office in under the U.S. federal court. Once you go to prison, you start your sentence, you are under the auspices of a different entity called the Bureau of Prisons, which is a bureaucracy that, carries out the sentences that judges impose, but judges no longer are involved, which in a bizarre way is a good thing because, as you know, Judge Kaplan and Judge Preska, the two judges, that were, I think, very conflicted and had ties to Chevron, who kind of came after me and created this awful situation where I'm, have been in detention now for 2.5 years. They have nothing to do with this. So right now, every day, the Bureau of Prisons, or their representative calls me up a couple times a day, sometimes more, and I have to take a selfie picture on a special phone they gave me to prove I'm at home. And on top of that, I have an ankle bracelet where they can monitor all my movements. I can get out for extremely limited purposes, lawyer meetings, medical doctor's appointments, stuff related to my son's school, although he's now remote because of the COVID thing. So I'm pretty much here, most of the day, usually all day, all night. But, here means I can still work and communicate and, come on your show and, be with my family and cook. The prison experience was much more brutal than I had expected. There was the conditions were terrible, frankly.
You were sending updates. It was we were reading some of the updates on air to our viewers pretty regularly. And there's the COVID scenario, which is horrifying, but you were in one facility and then you moved to another. Can you describe just some of the conditions for folks who may have missed that?
Just so people know, in the federal prison system, there's various layers of security. You know, there's penitentiaries, which are at the top, then high security, medium, low, and then camps.
Mhm.
Depending on your level of threat and whatever, they do an internal assessment, decide what level to put you at. There's over 100 prisons, federal prisons in the United States. So the one I went to was a low security, but because of COVID, they locked down the whole facility. Most of the time I was there for 45 days, and that meant we couldn't get out. We get out like 1 or 2 hours a week. I lived in a very small cell built for one person, but I had a cellmate. And there's just no space. And, ostensibly it was to protect us from, or protect the prison population from the spread of COVID, but like there was zero social distancing, very few masks. The medical attention was virtually non-existent. People who had symptoms would ask for attention and they wouldn't even get a response for 10 days.
Were they vaccinating folks?
Yes, but not systematically. Like you had to ask for it. And then there was zero testing, meaning they did not know whether there was COVID in the prison or not. And the rates of vaccination among staff, meaning the correctional officers, who, most of them are good people trying to do their jobs, was only about 50%. So, these people were coming in from the community around Danbury, Connecticut, which, by the way, Connecticut was, at the time I was there, experiencing very high rates of COVID. And they were, going out, living in the community, coming in, and half of them were not even vaccinated. And the real threat of COVID wasn't from inmates. It was from staff that, were coming in and out of the community. But no one really understood anything about the amount of COVID in the prison. And the prison would publicly report they had no cases. I mean, it was extraordinary because they didn't test.
Unreal.
And there were not only that, there were other very elderly inmates who've been in the system quite many years who, were having great difficulty getting appropriate medical care. And, I don't know the ins and outs of the budgets and how the Bureau of Prisons kind of looks at these issues, but I saw with my own eyes people who were not getting adequate medical care. And I felt personally, frankly, I just didn't feel safe from a medical standpoint. I mean, I felt safe physically. I mean, the people were really nice. The other people living there, what we call inmates, I hate using that word, were interesting, respectful. I've always said this, there's more respect on the inside of prison, at least this prison, than there is out here in the world. People just respect each other. There's so little space, you kind of have to be able to get along and make the experience somewhat tolerable, But, and the other issue is I found there was a real lack of food. I lost 25 pounds in 45 days. I can't explain it. I was eating, but the portions and they would give you were really small. And I'm a big guy and I just lost a lot of weight. And also there were, the nutrition was lacking. There were literally no fresh vegetables. I mean, I didn't have one salad the whole time. I had to scrounge, and I got some guy who worked in the kitchen once brought me a carrot, and I basically ate a bite for 10 straight days and nursed it down the nub. I mean, I was just so into this carrot. And, I mean, and the things you take for granted, like if you get if you have resources and you're free and you get hungry, you can always go to your fridge or order in if you live in Manhattan, or go down to the some store and get food, right? Doesn't work that way in prison. Like you can't get access to food if you're hungry, unless you work the system or have some way, but it's never that easy. So I found that to be difficult. But of course I wasn't the only one experiencing that. By the way, a lot of people in prison spend a lot of money in the commissary, meaning if you don't get enough money in the cafeteria, they call it the chow hall. Once a week you can go to the store where, you buy stuff from your commissary account. But like the store doesn't have any fresh food either. It's all processed food or like Doritos. I mean, people just like lived off of junk food. And I just refused to succumb to that, you know. So I just tried to really eat out of the chow hall, and you know, I did the best I could. The food is much better where I am now than in prison.
I can imagine, especially in New York.
Yeah.
What were the other inmates like? Did they understand why you were sentenced? It is a complicated case. I'm just saying, like, were there other folks in Danbury who had similar charges? I guess not the same as yours, but similar level charges?
So that's an interesting question. First of all, when you're like an older white guy like me and you come in, there's kind of a presumption that you're committed some sort of sex offense. I noticed that, you know.
Really? I don't mean to laugh, but that's very, I would have thought like Wall Street, some sort of,
well, you know, either a sex offense or maybe that, you know,
yeah.
but
Interesting.
you know, the first thing that others want to find out is why you're there. And they want to be sure, because there's a hierarchy of like these dynamics where sex offenders are not respected, and other people living there don't want to associate with them. And so they're like, what'd you do? Why are you here? And when I said I'm here for contempt of court, they're like, what's that? You know, oh, contempt of court, you mean you told the judge to go F off, you know? Like, we like you. It's not what I did.
You're like, kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
not as aggressively, but
you know, I didn't, yeah, but like, okay, yeah, something like that. And then they found out I was a lawyer, and just I think the way I conducted myself, and you know, people would come to me with legal questions, and I mean, I've made it clear I was not there to practice law, would not practice law, and didn't even understand half of that area of the law anyway. But I would try to help people or help them think through some of their problems and their legal problems, because there's a lot of advocacy that goes on in prison. People are always trying to figure out a way to get out early, or to, you know, to raise issues of compassionate release because of COVID. I mean, there were so many ways the advocacy could happen in the prison. Most defense lawyers just abandon their clients, you know, when they go into prisons. They think the case is over. So, you know, I did a lot of that, and I just met some fabulous people, some hyper creative, smart, good people. And, you know, it enhanced me as a human being. You know, I'm going to give you one example. So I was living in this cell, and there was a guy living literally next door, but like for days, I never talked to him. I didn't know his name. He's really quiet. And some other guy down the hall said, you know, that guy who lives next door to you was convicted of a gang murder. And he's been in prison 17 years. And the guy was young. I mean, he's like in his 30s. And I'm like, really? Wow. And so I got to know him a bit, and he told me what had happened. And yeah, he killed somebody. He said, I had to kill someone. I was 18, or he was going to kill me, and I had no choice. And I was in a gang. Wow. If I wanted to survive, you know, and like this was like an incredibly thoughtful, sensitive, smart, humble man. And he'd been in 17 years, you know, pretty much half his life. And I just don't think he should be there anymore. He's been rehabilitated, you know, so taxpayers are paying $40,000 a year for his incarceration. He's got another, check this out, he's got another 14 years. Oh my gosh. So what I found, by the way, I'm sorry I'm going on, I could talk about this forever. It's so interesting. You know, it's not that people there were innocent. I mean, a lot of people did things that were crimes, you know, but it's just the length of the sentences just struck me as bizarrely extraordinary. I mean, 15, 20 years, you know, like a judge like 10 years, 15 years without like even thinking. And it's like 15 years for this stuff.
Right.
And a lot of these are
Okay.
that obviously was a violent offense, but a lot are non-violent offenses where people are serving 5, 10, 15 years for like financial stuff. And I just was shocked at the length of the sentences. I mean, I'd come in and be like, your sentence is 6 months. Oh my God, that's nothing. You'll be out in no time. And I'm thinking to myself, it seems like an eternity, but like you couldn't say like, oh, because you're talking to a guy who's got a 20-year sentence. 'Cause 6 months, oh my God, you're so lucky. And I didn't feel that. And I will say that I was the only person in this entire prison, and there were not about 900 men there, who was there for a misdemeanor. Everyone else was there for a felony.
So
And by the way, the prison authorities were like, I mean,
what? They were shocked.
they're like, why are you here? Like, it doesn't make sense to us. We never see this kind of offense in a prison. You should have been sentenced to home confinement or probation. And it just underscored my belief all along about this case, where I'm being punished for my successful human rights work against Chevron by these judges. And, once they got out of the realm of the judges and into the bureaucracy of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, which is a professional bureaucracy. I mean, they have policies, they have, decent people running it. It was very clear they had no interest in doing Chevron's bidding. Like these judges, I mean, they just treated me like a normal person who was there for that level of offense, and they were shocked. And they ended up, furloughing me early for an appropriate reason that consistent with their policies.
I was going to ask you, had you been lobbying for it? How did it happen?
I don't know exactly how it happened, other than when COVID hit, Congress passed a law called the CARES Act that allowed wardens the authority to release inmates early to serve the rest of their sentences in home confinement, with the purpose of relieving some of the prison population such that there could be more social distancing, et cetera. And they said if you're 60 years of age or over with some sort of comorbidity, they had the authority to do that. So, honestly, I don't think there was a ton of that going on, but I think the authority existed. And I think on the basis of that law, they looked at my situation. By the way, I'm embarrassed. Well, not embarrassed. I'll just acknowledge I turned 60 in September of this year.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you, which was, roughly 2 months before I went in. So that was the authority that they used to allow me to serve the rest of my sentence at home. But again, I emphasize, even though I'm home, I'm not free. I'm still under the custody of the Bureau of Prisons.
That's fascinating. So now, okay, so when you are free, I guess, what happens? Like, where does this fight go? Is there anything happening to make sure that Chevron does pay? Because, okay, they've punished you, but then what else could they potentially do at this point?
Well, so the answer is there are other lawyers working on this matter, and the hope is they will carry the case forward and make sure Chevron complies with the judgment in Ecuador and pays the money to the indigenous peoples and farmer communities who the company poisoned over a period of decades. And, I think there's a certain over focus on Steve Donziger and an under focus on the thing that really matters, which are the indigenous peoples and these communities in the Amazon and Ecuador. And I think that's where the focus needs to go back to. When I become free, first of all, just to be clear, I'm disbarred as a lawyer in New York on the basis of this silliness, and I think that's a totally unfair decision. So I'm going to try to get my law license back. But one thing is clear is there are other lawyers who can carry this forward, and that really is the plan. As for me personally, I want to, pursue a bunch of stuff I want to do, including writing. I want to continue my human rights advocacy in a broad sense for the people of Ecuador and elsewhere. And I'm thinking through the details of all of that. But I can tell you, I'm really, really, really excited about the future, about the opportunities that are out there. And it's very important that, all the support that's come my way in the way of the Ecuadorian communities, that we continue to build a bigger and stronger and really turn what's been a campaign for many years into a movement for human rights accountability for corporations that pollute. I mean, it's just important because people are being hurt all over the world by this total misconduct by Chevron, Exxon. So many companies are doing this. And it's just important that there be mechanisms in place and people in place and resources in place to hold these companies accountable. Because if we can't do that, we will never save our planet from destruction. I mean, these are the companies that are driving this planet to ruin on the climate issue. So, you know, the human rights work, the human rights legal work is intimately connected to the survival of the planet. And I plan to continue to do this work. I mean, I'm doing it now from home with an ankle bracelet on, but come April 25th, if not sooner, I'm going to be free again and you know, be able to travel, and we'll continue to do this work.
Do you feel safe traveling to Ecuador or other? I mean, I think of, you know, knock on wood, everybody. I think of Berta Casares, who, of course, many felt was so high profile and esteemed as an activist, who, you know, they went after in Nicaragua. But do you feel safe leaving the U.S., where, you know, historically this kind of stuff is not as they go after you legally, I guess is a better way of saying it.
Well, there's a lot of ways to try to destroy a person. You're right. In the U.S., it's done through the weaponization of the law and the abuse of the law, which is what's happened to me. But, you know, again, I don't feel destroyed at all. I actually feel enhanced by this whole experience. I think my platform is bigger than ever. So I don't think it worked, although I paid obviously a very heavy price personally, but it has not worked. Like we're stronger now than we ever have been. And it's largely because I think Judge Kaplan, Judge Prescott, and Chevron totally overreached by going after me the way they did. And, you know, when I told my story, people responded. And now we have, you know, literally hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people who've heard about this, who had never heard about it before and who care. So that's a big step forward. We're strong. I want to just emphasize that. I think in terms of the security issue, something I always think about, you know, Global Witness does an annual report, you know, around, I don't know, I forget if it was 200 or 300 Earth defenders, environmental activists were murdered last year around the world. The woman you mentioned, Berta Casares, you know, that happened, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, but a huge environmental leader in Honduras and just murdered, you know. Yeah. And so, yeah, I don't feel totally secure. You know, I think there are forces out there that wouldn't mind if I disappeared from the face of the earth. But on the other hand, I feel protected, and I feel, you know, I don't think I'm a great risk, but, you know, wherever you travel, you have to calculate and assess risk. And, you know, I will continue to do that. And you know, we'll see. But I definitely, at some point, soon, I hope, plan on returning to Ecuador and meeting with my clients. And, you know, I've been there over 250 times. It's almost like a second. Yeah, I've traveled from New York to Ecuador over 250 times in 20 years. And
what first led you to Ecuador? How did you get looped into this fight?
Sure. When I was in law school, I met a student from Ecuador, John Bonifaz, and his father, who also was from Ecuador, lived in Massachusetts. They were the ones who, you know, brought my attention to this issue and actually started the case. We put a team together way back in the early 90s. This lasted a long time, to go down there and investigate. April of 1993 was my first trip. And that's how we got going on this. But it was because I met people from Ecuador when I was in law school in Massachusetts that I became aware of this. I mean, it was a real hidden issue because it happened in such an isolated area of the world. And of course, when Texaco, now Chevron, you know, made the decision to deliberately pollute. I mean, I want to emphasize the pollution problem that I'm dealing with is not an accident. It's not like the BP problem in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. This was a plan to save money, to deliberately dump cancer-causing toxic waste into the environment, into indigenous ancestral lands. And it happened for decades. Millions of gallons of this benzene and cancer-causing toxins per day were being dumped into streams and rivers that people were drinking their water from. So, Chevron knew when it was doing this that people would die, and thousands of people have died. We don't know the precise number because there hasn't been a proper epidemiological study. Company obviously doesn't want to fund such a study, but many, many people have died. The statistics are off the charts, and I've seen it with my own eyes, people I know and in my travels. So, once I saw it in April of '93, and also like visually, it looks apocalyptic. I mean, it's called the Amazon Chernobyl for a reason. I mean, imagine seeing like Olympic-sized swimming pools of oil in the jungle floor, oil on the roads, oil on people's bodies. I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe they chose to do it that way, to operate that way. The operational practices were just terrible. And so once you see it, you sort of can't turn your back on it. And once I started down that road, and we started to make progress and achieve a level of success, I just felt like I had a duty, an ethical duty to my clients who are very dependent on our team, because they had no ability to access courts without lawyers. We were raising funds to fund the case, and they were very dependent on us to have any hope of getting a remedy and surviving. So I was honored to be able to continue to do the work, to still do the work. But it's lasted a long time. And I think one reason it's lasted a long time is I don't think the courts are strong enough to take on corporate power, the fossil fuel industry at this level. And the other reason is I think Chevron feels so utterly threatened by the idea that indigenous peoples could collect a multi-billion-dollar payout in compensation for harm caused, that they're literally spending, billions of dollars on 60 law firms and 2,000 lawyers to try to prevent the people of Ecuador from collecting on their judgment, because they see it as a existential threat to their business model, because frankly, they know they've done this in many countries. And if the people of Ecuador were to collect, it would inspire people in other countries to do the same thing. And quickly their liability would multiply. And they're just very scared of that. And I've always said they not only wanted to win the case, even though they've lost, we won the case, but they not only wanted to win the case, they wanted to kill off the idea of the case. Being unable to win and having lost, they go after the lawyers, and they spend tons of money. They go after the lawyers who won, meaning me and others.
Right.
And they spend tons of money on their own corporate law firms like Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, Seward and Kissel, King and Spalding, firms that just profit tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars from the fossil fuel companies, to try to delay it as much as they can, and the idea is to discourage other lawyers from even taking on these cases. You look at me, they want to hold me up as like a symbol of something so other lawyers don't do the cases. But I want to tell other lawyers, it's a fabulous case. We've won, and I truly believe Chevron will pay in the near term, and I'm doing pretty well myself. So you can do this work and you can be successful at it.
Are there other people, indigenous, other people around the world who have suffered, from environmental spills, et cetera, that are moving forward with cases against Chevron or other oil companies? Like precedent or not? I mean, there's precedent.
Yeah. So let me just say this. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of potential cases against Chevron and the big oil companies around the world and in the United States. Very, very few of them are brought because the victims generally are, don't have the resources, and it's, there's not a whole lot of lawyers dedicated to this kind of work. Most of the legal talent works for the big companies where they can bill, $1,500 an hour and make a ton of money fighting people like me. So there's a real asymmetry of resources, but there's a ton of potential cases. But they're hard to win because of the disparity, the inequality of resources, and the inability of judges, particularly in the United States, who, our federal judiciary is now extremely populated by right-wing pro-corporate
Right.
judges, to push forward the cases and to look at them as, to really do their jobs and look at the facts and apply the law and be neutral. And, we got a neutral judiciary in Ecuador, which is where Chevron insisted the case be held, where Chevron accepted jurisdiction. And that neutral judiciary looked at what happened and they're like, Chevron, you're liable. You owe these people money. It's the judges in the United States, Judge Kaplan, Judge Preska, who have been completely biased in favor of the oil company and seem utterly incapable of looking at this in a fair manner, and seem very threatened by the very idea of individuals with dark skin from the Amazon coming into U.S. courts and holding an American company accountable for destroying their ancestral lands and for poisoning their ecosystem, which is what happened. So it's the U.S. judiciary, the federal, that has been structured in a way that has been extremely hostile to these types of human rights claims brought by victims of American corporate misconduct. It's the Ecuadorian judges, who, by the way, were Chevron again, one of the case held, who have treated the case fairly and have affirmed the judgment against Chevron, which, by the way, has been affirmed by 6 different appellate courts, including the Supreme Courts of both Ecuador and Canada, for enforcement purposes.
Right.
So the case is real, it's valid, and ultimately they're going to have to pay, even though they try to spend a ton of time talking about me instead of the environmental crimes they committed in the Amazon.
Yeah. Oh, well, don't you know that yelling at a judge, I know that's not what you did, is more serious than the deaths of hundreds of people. I guess my last question is, with the 2 judges, is there any accountability? Like, is there any sense now that folks are more aware, you've done a lot of press, that they're going to be able to survive in their seats? Are there any complaints? I don't know how this judicial accountability works.
Well, there's precious little judicial accountability in the United States of America. And that's one thing I've noticed with my own eyes, my own experience. Federal judges are appointed for life. The only way they can be removed is through impeachment by Congress. It's happened only 4 times in the history of our country, 4 times to the thousands and thousands of federal judges who have served throughout our history. It's virtually impossible to do. Federal judges tend to feel this tremendous sense of power and lack of accountability. And most judges, even right-wing judges, I think take their obligations to adhere to the rule of law seriously. I mean, I'm not an anti-judge person. I actually think our judiciary on the whole in this country is not terrible, could be much better. But if you are an individual judge with a political agenda, as Judge Kaplan is, or Judge Preska is, these are Federalist Society judges, and you decide to engineer an outcome, regardless of the facts or the law, I mean, seems like you can quite easily get away with it, which is what they did to me. I mean, we've been yelling about this for years. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals, the New York Federal Appellate Court, which oversees both of them, they're trial judges, has done virtually nothing to stop this. I mean, nothing to stop the fact that a respected human rights lawyer has been locked up, steps from the courthouse in his home for over 2.5 years on a misdemeanor where the maximum sentence is 6 months in jail. Where I'm held 2 years and 2 months before I go to prison, for doing something to protect my client's interests when Judge Kaplan ordered me to turn my computer over to Chevron. No lawyer in American history has ever been charged criminally with criminal contempt for appealing a civil discovery order in a civil case, which is what I did. So I'm really, frankly, disappointed in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Extremely disappointed that they have tolerated this abuse of my life, abuse of my human rights. And I'll point out, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, which is an important human rights body in the world, endorsed by the United States of America, which has a seat on the Human Rights Council of the United Nations, which oversees this body, There are 5 very respected international jurists, lawyers, who looked at this situation and concluded that my detention is a violation of multiple provisions of international law, including the United Nations Charter and other treaties to which the United States is a signatory. And they ordered the U.S. government to release me. This decision, which is just, it's incredibly important, like they never rule against the United States, hardly ever.
Wow.
Has been completely ignored by the federal appellate courts that are overseeing my case. You know, I mean, you'd think like, wow, you know, they'd take another look at this. I'm also disappointed, frankly, in Attorney General Garland. You know, we've been asking him for years, I mean, to take back the prosecution from a private Chevron law firm. I'll remind people, my prosecution was not done by the U.S. government, which refused to prosecute me. It was originated by Judge Kaplan, who has ties to Chevron. He then appointed a Chevron law firm to prosecute me in the name of the public, and they've been paid over $1 million of taxpayer money to lock me up for 2+ years. You know, this was a Chevron prosecution. It violates the rule of law. It's the first corporate prosecution ever in the United States. And I promise everyone that if this kind of thing isn't stopped, it's going to happen again and again and again, targeting activists and lawyers like myself who take on these powerful fossil fuel interests. I mean, this is their playbook. And I'm kind of a rat in a laboratory experiment to them. It's like a person they're experimenting with to see how far they can push this craziness. But I just find it shocking that our judges have not stopped this.
And
now,
nothing from Merrick Garland, nothing.
I mean, Merrick Garland is passive. I mean, come on, man, do your job. Do your job. I mean, do you want private corporate prosecutions in the United States of America? I mean, countries that actually have much less respect for human rights than ours don't do that kind of thing. You know, and it's also, while I'm at it, expressing my disappointment. Like, where's the New York Times on all this? I mean, they totally ignored my case. What's that all about? You know, I went to Harvard Law School with Barack Obama, by the way. We were in the same class. And I've been locked up for 2.5 years down the street from the New York Times newsroom. And I'm a lawyer who won, you know, a $10 billion judgment against Chevron. And come here and cover this.
Yeah.
For crying out loud. Why don't you do that? Because Chevron like had that much influence or such a big advertiser. So there's a lot of institutions in our society that, as you know, because you report on this stuff, have been seriously weakened in recent years. Institutions that used to check corporate power have become instruments of corporate power. And one is the judiciary. I mean, the judiciary used to have to be, you know, an antidote to that, or the big media. And now they're becoming instruments of it. And I think that those of us who do this work as a result are in much more vulnerable positions than people who were doing this work in the 1970s and 1980s.
Right. It's definitely, I mean, there have the amount of reporting we've done on similar, you know, whether it's campaign fund complaints against squad members that are completely made up and to force them to go through legal hoops. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's part of using the law as a weapon. The right wing has done quite a bit of it. And frankly, I think even Democrats are doing it against progressives. So it's scary. It's definitely part of a trend. And Stephen, I'm just always so grateful for your honesty and your empathy and your time, because it is precious. You are with your family now, and I hope we can get some more updates really soon, and we'll keep the pressure up on Merrick Garland, the Biden administration, everywhere we can do so, and share that with folks as well.
Thank you so much. And I want to compliment you for your great work. And I really think the independent media, you know, you and others, are just critical to the survival of our democracy if it does survive. And I just want to salute you for what you do. And also, by the way, if people want to help, yes, you know, the people of Ecuador help me, please go to freedonziger.com, FREEDONZIGER, and you can hopefully donate to our legal defense fund. It costs a lot of money to pay lawyers and to deal with what they're throwing at me. So if you can join our campaign and give a little, that'd be great. Even if you can't give, join the campaign. We need as many people as we can behind this. So thanks again. I really appreciate the
Thank you,
opportunity.
Stephen.